So welcome back.
Welcome back. We are not at Two Creeks Farm today. We are taking a little bit of a sojourn at my house and recording in Carrollton, Georgia. We hope you're not finding that too disorienting.
We are elsewhere then. Actually, we're right here though. So
We're
how
always
can
right
that be?
here. I know, it's the darndest thing, isn't it?
That's a different discussion.
No matter
We'll do
where
that
you
one
go,
later.
there you are.
Exactly. It's metaphysical.
But we'd like to take you back in time for a minute or two, and perhaps back in time in a way where, for some of you, this was going to be a trip down memory lane. For others of you, it's probably going to be like listening to someone speak a foreign language, because we want to talk a little bit about recess. So, to take you back to the Elysian fields of your youth and those playgrounds of your youth. And part of the reason why we wanted to talk a little bit about recess is because it's evidently something that's going out of style these days.
Well, and I am pretty sure, if I understood correctly, I grew up with several people actually who ended up being elementary school teachers. And there are school systems that no longer have recess. There are some that no longer require gym, which started as a requirement when I was, I think, in the 6th grade. But elementary school, especially, recess was that beloved, longed-for time every day.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was usually after lunch. Do you remember those little tiny milk cartons?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the 1 cup size.
Yeah, so we would roll one of those up really tightly after lunch. We'd go outside, a whole gang of us, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and just toss it up in the air, and somebody would grab it, and they try to run, and everybody piles on until they can wrestle the milk carton away, and then that person tries to run, and
Is
you do
the
that
target.
for,
Yeah, we used to call that kill the man with the ball, although I understand that there are less politically correct names for that.
there are much less sensitive and politically correct names for that game. But needless to say, it was a thing in different parts of the country, obviously. All the recess equipment was made out of heavy steel and metal and chains and
Yeah, this is a different era.
the merry-go-round. Now that was a gathering place. That was a somber moment of reverence that we would hold right there just before we get onto the merry-go-round, because you had to catch it just right in order to be able to get it when it was going around at about half the speed of sound. And there would be an inordinate number of people on it at once, and invariably several would get thrown off. I got thrown off many times. Scratches and scrapes and cuts and bruises.
Yeah, I remember learning a lesson in the disparity between imagination and physical reality on the merry-go-round, because I remember one time we got that thing going very, very fast. No one was on it, and it was whipping around as fast as you could possibly imagine. And so I had this moment where I thought, like, okay, I can sort of see the bar going around and around very quickly, and I can imagine myself reaching in at the precise moment when it was passing and grabbing a hold with all my might. And I imagined that, and I was physically able to do it, but what I didn't take into account, of course, was that the centrifugal force would make it impossible for me to pull myself onto it.
Yeah.
So I got dragged around about 360 degrees and ended up with all kinds of little cuts and
Yeah. The monkey bars. The monkey
yeah.
bars. The ones we had at my elementary school had the sort of like the taller towers at each end with the crossbar hanging from my knees. The kid climbs up, and I don't think there's anybody even anywhere around me. Scared the crap out of me, and I fell. I had to go get some stitches in the back of my head.
Yeah, well, this is one of the differences, I think, between our generation, Mark, and sort of the current generation is there was a much greater expectation that you were going to be engaging in physically dangerous things, and it was expected more or less that you'd have to go to the hospital every so often, especially among males. That it was just a matter of course that you'd probably break maybe 2 bones along the way and have several episodes of being stitched up, and it was just sort of taken for granted in a way that I think in today's world the expectation is that none of that should happen. Things should be rubber coated and hand safety railed to the point where no one is ever in danger of stubbing a toe. But one of the benefits of growing up in a more dangerous way is that you learn very quickly what you can get away with and what you can't.
Yeah, it's easier to see the limits and the boundaries.
Yeah.
And also, a couple of interesting observations that I have now, looking back almost 50 years later on those elementary school recesses, the persona just disappears when you go out the door for recess, because everybody's out there grappling and running and screaming and yelling and chasing and being chased, and the constructed way of being in the classroom and with each other and all of these other agendas that you have even as a grade school child seems to evaporate on their recess ground, on the playgrounds.
And I wonder about, like, boy, I try to imagine myself in today's environment, and it's almost hard to imagine how these kids get through the day without combusting at some point, you know, to have all of that, very sort of exuberant youthful energy and wanting to be physical and wanting to be just sort of joyful and unbridled and so on, and not having that 45 minutes either in the form of gym class or better yet in the form of recess, just to be an animal basically, or to be more toward the animal. I think that part of what's happening is that, you know, we're sort of not acknowledging or allowing space for our basic animality, you know.
Well, and that's an interesting way to put it too, because in sort of a different perspective to look at it, that was a safe place. And that's kind of a catchphrase these days, is having a safe place. That kind of environment, having that release, having that those moments in time on the playground of having really no agenda, no expectations, very little constrictions, it acted as a safe place for our emotions, for our ways of interacting with each other.
Yeah, I think so. And as I remember back to those days, one thing I remember is that, you know, Kill the Man with the Ball was appealing precisely because it was about the most anarchic, crazy game. It wasn't even really a game because no one ever won as such, that you can imagine. And sort of the general rule of thumb is the less structured the activity was, the better it was, at least in my experience. So dodgeball was a great thing because there were very few rules. There were a few rules, but not that many. Kill the Man with the Ball, all of the most chaotic things. Now, when they, on the other end of the spectrum, when they made us line up for square dancing, that was almost like anti-gym, anti-recess. And I think the reason why was because every movement was choreographed and controlled and regulated, and so it was physical. So the pull was not necessarily the physicality. The pull was the lack of regimentation and the lack of structure, and I think that was what made it so damn appealing.
Well, and for me at my elementary school, it was kickball. One of the teachers almost every day would try to sort of coerce us into, it was voluntary. I mean, recess, you did whatever you wanted to do. But they would always try to coerce us into having teams and playing a game of kickball on a different area of the playground. And it was always a chore for them because most of us didn't want to do that. We wanted that unstructured, chaos of free play, free for all activity,
Yeah.
without the rules and the regulations and the structure. And that seemed to be almost like a catharsis for us.
Oh, yeah, very definitely. Because, I remember, and probably you do too, Mark, and maybe some of you in the audience do too, like how restricted a lot of the school day felt, you know. And I don't know about you, but I was an inveterate watcher of the clock. Boy, did I learn about the experience of temporality and how slow, in terms of how we experience time, things can be. Like in language arts class, that was sort of my bête noire, a phrase I did not learn in language arts class, incidentally.
The ultimate goal for a lot of the kids in my elementary school was this orange belt, the patrol belt.
Oh,
you remember that?
Yes, I do remember
With
and with
had
the little badges
badge
on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was because if you got that, then when you were on patrol, those were the kids that got to go out and raise the flag on the flagpole in the morning and take it down in the afternoon. And that it was such a sense of being acknowledged by everybody.
Well, I think it was sort of like almost like a mini promotion toward adulthood. I think that was sort of part of the charm of it, was that you were recognized as being maybe a little bit more grown up. You got to give orders. The other students, at least nominally, had to obey your orders, and so
Maybe that
on.
was maybe that was in a way that was a rite of passage.
Could be, but a rite of passage that I think only the minority got to be.
Yeah.
The patrol.
Yeah.
Is that what we called them? The
School patrol.
yeah, something like that. Only the minority got to be. So, unfortunately, I never got to be on the patrol. I wanted to be, but they would never let me. I think because I probably wasn't as mature back then and as the other kids were, and so they thought, well, you're just sort of a class clown and goofball, and no one will pay attention to you, which was true. I was the goofball and class clown.
Well, that came later for me. When I was in elementary school, I was too afraid not to behave because I knew the consequences when I got home, because my mom and dad literally knew every teacher and the principal in the school. So I did get to do that, and that was a significant thing for me. Now, but I wanted to go back to the dodgeball because there was a turning point there. My elementary school went to 5th grade, and then 6th and 7th grade was middle school, which was a separate building in a different part of town for me. And the highlight of those 2 years was dodgeball.
I believe it. I'm thinking a little bit also of sports in that, after school sports in that time frame. And I did wrestling for a couple seasons. And in elementary school wrestling, God, I loved wrestling in elementary school, because what would happen was they'd get you together and they'd teach you a few moves, and you had to sort of learn some things like sitting out and turning and this and that, and then they'd have you practice a little while, but the majority of it was about actually doing the activity. But then when I made the transition to junior high school, it was a tremendous disenchantment for me, because instead of spending 3/4 of the time actually wrestling, we would spend like this huge amount of time like running laps and trying to develop cardio fitness and weight training and so on and so forth, and a relatively small amount of the time actually wrestling. And I think that what spoiled it for me was the reason why I didn't continue with that was because the emphasis all of a sudden became on all the regimentation necessary to be a winner and to have a winning record. The whole emphasis was on winning, and not as it was in elementary school, where the emphasis was on basically having fun by way of wrestling and with other
unstructured
people.
fun.
Yeah, and having a larger fraction of sort of unstructured and the organized sports in terms of winning. I don't know, for me, spoiled a lot of it,
Well, and then there's a big overcorrection for that too, with the winning, to where now every kid gets these participation trophies.
Oh yeah, that was not the way it was back in our day. I don't know about you, but
Yeah,
like they
not at
never
all.
had a participation trophy. They only had. You were lucky if the second place person got something. You know?
Yeah. So that, and to me, that cheapens the. It gives kind of an ugly flavor to the whole thing of having the play and the competition and the events. Is if everybody gets, then there's what's the incentive to
Yeah.
try to be
Yeah. Right. Well,
better or the best or whatever.
Yeah, and I think, kids are smarter and more perceptive than we generally give them credit for being. And I think they're smart enough and perceptive enough to realize that, when things like that happen, it's all fake. It's all fake. It's all theater. That there's nothing real or substantive going on.
Well, and
because the kids know who's really good at stuff. Right? The kids know who can
Yeah.
hit the ball the farthest,
Yeah.
who can pop the wheelie on the bicycle, whatever it
Yeah.
happens to be. They know. And their sort of perception of winners and losers will happen irrespective of whether someone's walking around with a
Yeah.
participation trophy. So I think in their view, it's all just kind of a fake charade most of the time, because what really matters is what you can do.
And the kids know, and also the kids are more resilient
Yeah.
than the grown-ups give them credit for now.
Hmm.
They're more resilient physically, but also emotionally. They're more resilient so I think it really is a big loss psychologically that some schools have taken away that unstructured recess time.
Yeah, well, I think so too. Of course, there's always I suppose, a tendency and a desire to romanticize our youths, and to see sort of any deviation from that as being deficient somehow, and perhaps we're to an extent prone to that. But boy, my goodness, like when I imagine what it must be like to go for years in elementary school without that sort of oasis. I viewed it as a kind of oasis
Yeah.
well, certainly recess, but to a lesser extent gym class and art class, those sort of oasis moments.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, my
Less
goodness.
structure.
Yeah.
Well, let's let us know what you think about this, because it's a topic that came up spontaneously with us, and we wanted to share it with you today.
Yeah, so, yeah. And thanks, as always, for joining us. You might tell us if you like the new camera setup and the new sort of environment. This is at my house in Carrollton, Georgia, not Two Creeks Farm, Bowden, Georgia. In any case, thanks for being with us. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
See you next time.
Bye-bye. Alrighty. I like that.